Right. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Please, can I bring the meeting to order, please? Please. Thank you. Sorry, I really would like to start again, or we'll never finish. We're running quite late. We're going back now. We're back in the presence of the public. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. And we are back to agenda item number 11, as per our previous plans, which is the Treasury Management Report. Is Ellie here? Hi, Ellie. Can you introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Q4 Treasury Management Report, which therefore shows the outcome position with respect to Treasury Management for 2021-22. It's one of two Treasury Management papers that goes to full council, that's recommended by this committee for consideration at full council. So that's the Q2 and Q4 reports. I will try and be brief because I know that you've had a long meeting, but there are just a few things I want to bring to your attention. The report outlines the economic position as at the end of Q4, but obviously we are still in a fast-moving environment, so it is possible or even likely that there has been movement since that narrative was pulled together between the end of those quarter reports and then when they're considered at committee, so today, but it's not actually as dramatic a shift as potentially earlier on in the year, so like with the Q2 report, for example. I'd just like to draw your attention to the borrowing position on page 89 in table 2. So the total borrowing has gone down by 33 million during the year. There are a range of factors that influence this, but one of those is increases in cash balances that the council holds, and that reflects a healthy cash position for the council. And that has resulted in the council being able to employ internal borrowing instead of external. So it doesn't mean that capital expenditure has been zero for the year, it just reflects where we've taken our borrowing from. It's also probably worth mentioning that we've taken the opportunity of historically low interest rates earlier in the year, particularly before Christmas, to extend our maturity profile with our loans. So as we've been refinancing loans, we've taken out slightly longer loans in some cases. As a result, we have a very healthy average rate of interest payable at the moment, and that also reflects our strategy of having a decent proportion of short-term borrowing at lower rates. And it's a result of these circumstances that the interest payable budget for 21-22 was underspent. Quickly looking at investments, so in table 7 you will see the council's performance on interest receivable per quarter, and you will see that as we come towards the end of the year, the rates there start to increase, reflecting the increase in the bank rate during the year. Over the last few years, we've not really had to actively manage our really short liquid deposits, so such as money market funds, because the rates have been so negligible and not changing. But obviously that situation is moving now, so we are actively managing these and looking to ladder our deposits as what to kind of reflect as the bank rate is increasing incrementally, and as we're looking towards the bank rate increasing further still over the course of the remainder of 2022. And the last thing to point out is the potential indicators in Appendix 2 on page 101. They are all in line with where they should be, and as per the indicators that were set out in the Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions for Ellie? Anyone? I don't see any questions. Are there any comments in terms of the debate? And Ellie, please just stay just in case, because you never know how these things might go. Any comments? Anything?
Thank you, Chair. Two things. The first is, and I'll be coming back to this at a further agenda item later, we read the assessments in here about 2022-23, and they're already, of course, massively out of date. Things do change, and we have to accept this is the way in which reporting takes place. But the information which we will be reporting this report to Council is, I don't want to be rude about it, circumstances have massively overtaken the forecasts and the expectations which there were going to be for 22-23, and that is unfortunately the way things work. The reason I wanted to ask a question about a very small item within this, but it just puzzled me. I had lots of other questions as well, but it was on table 5, and it's one which Tom may be in a stronger position to answer than others, because I believe he's the director of Pathfinder Legal Services Limited. And if not, my apologies for suggesting that he is. it's just the cash flow loan of £325,000 on that is shown as being repaid in 2029-30. Given the financial situation of Pathfinder Legal Services Limited, I know that 325,000 is part of 1.05 million, but I'm also aware, if I remember correctly, that that's at an interest rate of 3.25%. And given where we are with inflation at the moment, I just wonder if it's still in our and the shareholders' interests to have a repayment year as late as 29-30, when the solvency of the company would suggest that it would be possible to have a repayment prudently a lot more quickly than that.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any more comments? If not, Tom, do you want to answer that point?
Thank you, Chair. Well, from memory, that's a long-term loan agreement that we've entered into with Pathfinder, and the interest rate was struck at a particular point in time that reflected our kind of borrowing portfolio, and obviously much of our debt itself is fixed term. It was assessed on the basis that the company would always have a working capital need. The nature of the businesses that they bill for work in arrears, and that led to the calculation. So I don't think, from memory, I don't think there are mechanisms to us to open that up at the council's initiative on its own right, but along with the company, continue to keep it under review and work closely with them, of course, all the time.
Thank you, Tom. Is that okay, Chris?
It wasn't technically a loan that was made available to what's now Pathfinder Legal Services Limited. It was a facility which was made available to them, and they chose to take up that facility at a certain time. But given that it's a Cllr company and the lenders are the four shareholders, it is surely not beyond the bounds of possibility to find a way of managing to get that changed, especially if it's to our disadvantage to leave it as it is at the moment. There's no point in having eventually having a large amount of surplus cash sitting in Pathfinder Legal Services Limited. There's a limit to how much any legal charges may be able to be reduced to the Cllr owners. And you also don't want to start paying dividends too early when there'll be taxation on that, and also for that matter, taxation, corporation tax anyway, on the profits. So I just wonder if that could be given some consideration about whether it's appropriately in the interests of the four shareholders for the facility to continue to operate and be utilised all the way up to 29-30.
Yes, well, yeah, we will indeed keep that under review. At this moment in time, it is needed by Pathfinder as part of its cash flow, but I think Councillor Boden raises useful considerations.
So that is noted and will hopefully be taken into consideration indeed. Any more questions? Any more comments? I see none. Shall we go to the recommendation, which there is only one? We would note and endorse it for consideration at full council, with the understanding that regrettably it will be out of date, although full council is coming up. So, you know, everyone happy with that? Everyone in favor? Shall I take it as unanimous? If not, please shout. Thank you very much. Which brings us rather neatly into the agenda plan and training plan, which is item 12 on our agenda. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. This is the way this is set out is in a different format, but is set out in this format after every annual meeting of council. So you'll see that you have your agenda plan attached here, the current training plan, and the review of appointments to outside bodies, as well as internal advisory groups and panels, where the one change there is the establishment or changing the composition of the County Farms Working Group so that it becomes a cross-committee working group under the auspices of this committee and Environment and Green Investment Committee, with a membership of 8, with 1 member from each group from each of the parent committees. And you'll also see there is attached to this report the appointment of member champions. That's it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now, I understand we have an amendment, which I think would be useful at this point if it was moved. Would you like to move it, Steve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We believe we need to propose an amendment to a recommendation 4. Basically, it seems to be that joint administration has taken advantage of a legal loophole. Working groups are set up that aren't decision making don't have to be politically proportional by law. And we seem to be increasing the amount, A, at which they're set up and B, at which they're used. However, those working groups present their decisions in front of a committee. And we've seen in various occasions, I'm sorry, if it goes to committee, I'm sorry, it's already been through the working group. Please just stamp this through. And discussions are somewhat muted, which I find not appropriate, because the appropriate place to make a decision on various matters is in the public domain. You see, these working groups work behind closed doors. Now, to a certain extent, there's public scrutiny guaranteed through their member representatives if they're politically proportional. But when they're set up in this way to deliberately disadvantage the opposition, so this one will be 6 administration to 2 Conservatives, whereas we are, almost half the amount of members in the organisation, and then expected just to rubber stamp them without query a decision. It's inappropriate. So our proposal is to deliver political proportionality, which is written in law if they were decision making. So I think that we need to bring this to the public's attention, ask for you to change it. I did have a further amendment which was ruled out, and that was to go through the appointments and check them all for political proportionality, but that is beyond the realm of this group. And I'd ask that that be taken separately to the Constitution and Ethics. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Steve. So do I take it that we only have the one amendment to item 4? Now, before I open the debate on the amendment, can I ask if you have a seconder? Chris is seconding. Okay, anyone has any discussion on this amendment? Lorna, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Count has 2 members of his group on this working group that is being, whose composition is being revised, and also on the other working groups where they have been set up in a similar format with 2 members of each group. The aim of these working groups is not to make decisions, indeed they are precluded from doing so, but to give the chance for consideration of ideas, discussion, options, which can then be brought to committee where the debate then takes place. And in that way, it seems to me that having views from all of the groups represented on this authority is a good thing. Now, Councillor Count seems to be trying to adopt the high ground by saying that there should be proportionality on these committees. But I will remind him, firstly, of the 100% Conservative group that met behind closed doors and approved and oversaw a £13 million overspend on the Ely Southern Bypass. I will remind him of the 100% Conservative working group that sat to consider HGVs in villages in the Diamond area of Cambridgeshire, from which my nomination was particularly barred, and in which therefore my community had no say in the outcome, which after it had been considered at several meetings by a 100% Conservative membership, came to the monumental conclusion that it was all too difficult and there was nothing that could be done. So I don't think Councillor Count is on very high ground at all when he suggests that 2 members on everything of working groups of this type is insufficient for them. The opposition has been invited and has been given the opportunity to participate on, I think, every single working group that this administration has established. And I don't propose to take any nonsense from him about how hard done by he is being when the experience that we have had under a Conservative administration is of being totally excluded from working groups in the way that I have described.
Thank you. Any further debate on this amendment? Before I say that, please may I absolutely take exception with the idea that we rubber stamp things that have been discussed at working groups without public scrutiny. That will never happen and it has not happened. That does not mean that the discussion is to be repeated. it means that the recommendations coming forward from the working group need to be debated by a politically proportionate group of people in law, as we do at these committees. And therefore, if there is no further discussion of this amendment, shall I take it to the vote? All those in favour? All those against? No abstentions, I take it.
The Chair, the result of the vote is 6 votes in favour, 7 against. The amendment is therefore lost.
Now, we have got the recommendations as unamended. Any further debate on those, please? Can't see any. Shall I take them on block? Yes, Chris. Your mic, Chris.
So I just want to make sure I'm on the right page here. We are talking about agenda item 12, I take it. Fine. I was just a bit surprised in looking at, this is where I got my pages wrong, the Strategy and Resources Committee Agenda Plan, Appendix 1, and committee date of the 20th of September 2022. Is that a definite date for a committee meeting? Because the last I'd heard, it was a reserve date only.
It is most definitely a definite date now, and the invite has been updated last week to confirm that.
If there are no further questions, shall we take those recommendations on block? All those in favour, please. Is that unanimous? Thank you very much, and thank the discussion. Shall we move on to item 13 now, which is the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for the period ending 31st of March. Tom.
Thank you. The committee will turn to page 121, where we have the final year-end position, a revenue underspend of around 18 million, or 4% of the council's budget. We've discussed before in this committee the causes of that underspend. They remain as they were. Demand projections of being higher than the actual levels of activity, and in part that reflects the council's long-term successes in providing preventative services. There's also some staffing underspends and pandemic-related provisions, as well as ensuring that we make full application of government grant funding. The council takes forward this financial flexibility. Much of it was anticipated during business planning. And in addition, we see ongoing challenges, particularly from inflation, uncertainty around both those demand levels, and in particular, the high needs block, special educational needs and disability deficit. Coming to the recommendations on the front of the report, recommendation A relates to the Contain Outbreak Management Fund. So an example of using that central government funding and applying it in line with the conditions last year. We have some further funding still available in the current financial year that we're considering. The committee's asked to agree the overall minimum revenue provision to be made. MRP is an aspect of the council's cost of capital schemes. It includes a one-off overpayment, which we are proposing to make due to an ongoing government consultation. And the report sets out more detail around that at section 9.2. In the other recommendations, we also confirm accounting for capital funds, reducing the overall level of external borrowing to be taken out, and agree transfers into and out of earmarked reserves at year end. We consider this in order to make funds available to future financial years to set out the specific risks set at 13.1 in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Now, thank you, Tom. I understand we again have an amendment, which I think we should probably move before we do anything else. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. There are two amendments involved. One is regarding transparency, which is something that I've said before. So we've heard from Tom that the underspend for the year is some 18.76 million. However, this is after the recommendations that are to be put to the vote are included. And I've pointed out before, it seems to me that when you're looking at in the past and you decide whether there was an underspend or not, The end of the year, the underspend was something, and now, some months later, we're asked to make decisions about that. So if that affects the underspend, it's the pre-spend decision that should be noted. Now, I can understand the embarrassment for going with a figure of £24.76 million as underspend. It's embarrassing enough at 18.76. But the truth of the matter is, at the end of the year, you were underspent by 24.76 million on revenue. Furthermore, lack of transparency, and I've raised this point before as well, is on the capital programme, the underspend is noted as being 43.7 million. However, it doesn't take account of the variations budget, which is allowable should you go under or over. So you actually had £80 million in total to deliver capital projects that you failed to deliver in the year. Combined total, you failed to deliver capital and revenue projects totaling of £100 million. Now, I know that there are a lot of glib reasons for why COVID, capacity, Brexit, Ukraine, everything gets thrown into the pot. It's always somebody else's excuse and not yours as to why these things don't happen. But at the end of the day, the position is £100 million worth of budgeted for items did not get delivered in the year that they were supposed to get delivered, and they are being marginally disguised by the fact that we are supposed to approve recommendations 1 year for an underspend that happened the year before on decisions we make after the event. So I don't think that's appropriate, and I believe that the public are entitled to know the actual figures. When I mention the actual figures, those are only the ones that are based on the papers in front of us, because I could remind members that there was a £4 million earlier underspend in the year that was allocated to the adults reserve, bringing that up from 24.76 million to about 29 million. And I can also add in the public health reserve, which was a £4 million underspend in this year, but because they bought programs for the coming, underspend last year, because they bought programs for the coming year, that is decided that that's appropriate and was spent last year. So I'm sorry, but a lot of these are just disguising the fact that we're not delivering. The county council is not delivering the services that it had the budget for, at the same time claiming it's short of money. So I find the two difficult to reconcile. So I think the public need to know that is the reason behind the first amendment. The second amendment is more of a technical one, and it's to assist the county council. So there's a recommendation for a minimum revenue provision payment, and it includes an overpayment of £3.528 million based on a what-if scenario. So there are potentially going to come in a change of rules by government. If those rules come in, the county council will have to pay £3.528 million. No quibble there. If the rules don't come in, they don't, nor would it be prudent to do so. So if the rules don't change, once you've spent the money, you've spent the money. So why not put that into an earmarked reserve in case you don't need to pay it? It's very coincidental, but the sum involved, 3.528 million, is very similar to the 3.525 million overcharge in the adult social care budget. So when the papers were brought forward at the February budget and we were asked to approve a 3% adult social care budget, that was on the basis of the figures supplied and known at that point in time. In the next report, agenda item 14, it is decided that those figures were actually wrong. Some of that is due to grant that came in, but some of those are just a recalculation of what is actually necessary to move forward to. Well, I think it's incumbent on you, if you have the money available, which I've just demonstrated you do have the money available, that the first port of call for that 3.525 million would be to refund the people you wrongfully took the money from based on information that you now know to be correct. So those are the reasons for the two amendments. I do hope that you can be convinced to do the right thing and support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Do you have a second? Thank you, Chris. Is there any debate? Would anybody like to say anything before I sum up? Richard.
I'm afraid this one is just politicking. I think it just needs to be put very clearly that there's a 17 million budget black hole this year and a 60 million pound black hole over 3 years. And so the idea that we should take the decisions that the opposition want us to do would be highly irresponsible. And I don't think we should debate it further. I think we should just vote against it.
Thank you, Richard. Is there any more? Yes, Chris.
Thank you. I do support this proposal. I believe that the justification which was given for the increases has proven to be wrong and was said at the time was wrong. I'd like to explore that further, but in the main debate. But that's my justification for agreeing with this particular proposal of this amendment.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. If there's no further debate on the amendment, I'm quite happy to put it to the vote now on the basis that as per F, no, we can't adopt the figures of capital and revenue. That's not meaningful. And on G, if we've been scrambling around to find money to overpay with the understanding that we can underpay later, it's like a mortgage, you can take it in and out. If the government doesn't change the rules to actually implement a proposal like this on something that we're being asked to set aside as a, it's not appropriate. So that would be my reason for recommending that we defeat this amendment. In terms of the actual amendment, all those in favor, please. All those against? I haven't seen any abstentions.
Chair, the result of the vote is 6 votes in favour, 7 votes against. The amendment is therefore lost.
Thank you, Michelle. Now, for the recommendations as to item 13, would anybody like, Chris, did you want to speak now?
If I may, thank you very much indeed, Chair. First of all, on the 4th page of this report, I think it's under the paragraph 3.1. Yeah. May I thank the Finance Department. I made a request, if you recall, Chair, more than 12 months ago, and said, in reports such as this, when talking about revenue budget outturns and reports, it makes an enormous amount of sense to show public health as being zero, since it's a ring-fenced expenditure, and really it shouldn't really form part of the detailed analysis of the tables which are presented to us. So I'm extremely grateful this report does exactly that. It's an appropriate thing to do. So thank you very much indeed for that. On the next page, we have a very interesting graph, which is the forecast outturn position 2021-22, showing how the reported figures on outturn changed from May through to the final outturn. And the reason this is very interesting is to see how the underspend, for want of a better word, increased during the course of the year. Now, I understand how these figures are produced, and I'm not making any criticism of the accounting function that we've got about how these figures were produced. They've been done on a consistent basis. I understand the process which is done, and I'm not even going to advocate that that position be changed. What I am saying is that numbers such as this need to be interpreted because they are incomplete, let's put it that way. They contain quite a lot of very detailed information, which is justified on an iterative basis for individual items in individual departments, but they fail to take into account a large number of things which are known at the time, but can't, for various reasons, be taken by finance into their outturn reports. And give an example, back in November, when we were showing an outturn of October, November, we were showing an outturn of 7 or 8 million. We knew at the time, and we said at the time, that is not going to be your outturn. You're going to have an outturn, negative outturn significantly greater than that. The figures said 7 or 8,000, and they were being used as justification for decisions which were being, or shortly afterwards, were being made. And we have to accept, and I'm addressing this as much to Tom as anything else, we have to accept, I'm not saying the numbers are wrong. I'm not saying that the process in producing them is wrong. What I am saying is that these numbers need to be interpreted and need to be subject to interpretation. And if we fail to recognize the limitations of the information which were presented in our outturn positions, then we will be making decisions based on wrong information, or rather on incomplete information. So that's the point I would like to make. I hope Tom would agree with me that interpretation of these figures is all important, because we'll be coming to the outturn position for 22.3 in our next agenda item. And I'll have a challenge, Chair, to you and to other members of this committee about interpretation of that figure. But I'm bringing it to the attention of members that utilisation of the outturn position as it is currently presented to us, both cumulatively for the whole of the council, but also for individual departments, the interpretation is all important. I'll give an example on health, for example, and health, of course, I fully accept is outside the overall structure because it's ring fenced. But we were told by officers on the health side some 6 months ago that certain items of expenditure which had been budgeted for in the current financial year of 22-23 were not going to be able to be achieved because of capacity issues. That hasn't been reflected in our figures. We're still not showing that now, but we knew it 6 months ago because we were told by the officers that's what was going to happen. So interpretation of these figures is all important. And I'll come back to interpretation in the next agenda item, if I may.
Thank you very much, Chris. Tom, was there anything you wanted to answer there before I move on?
I think I largely agree. I think with the remarks Councillor Boden's made around interpretation, the shape of that graph on page 125 has varied, I think. So we see very much a downward trend here. Prior to the pandemic, we were in quite a flat place, which personally I was quite happy with in terms of the accuracy of the forecast. And I think in previous years, we'd seen more of a bell curve of kind of peaking in the middle and then coming back on track. So the aspiration is to be as accurate with the forecast as early as possible, but there's difficult circumstances, particularly in a pandemic with significant government funding.
Thank you, Tom. Very useful indeed. Edna, then Richard and Steve.
Yeah, so I've got a excuse me. I've got a question really about the approach that finance takes. And it may be something that you would want to sort of reflect on and think about and maybe get back at a later date. But it's something that's occurred before and it's sort of not been addressed. And I just choose as an example of what I mean. 12.3.1, page 142, there is an underspend being reported, which is quite significant. And it cites reasons for the underspend. And basically, these aren't things that have happened in the last reporting period. There are things that, were to do with the setup in the year, the project team resources. It's just a whole sort of list of sort of reasons why things might be delayed. And actually, these were the reasons given the last time this matter was reported. And I actually said these reasons aren't acceptable because if you are talking about an underspend in a period, you're looking for things that have happened in that period that were not expected that have caused that underspend, not things that pre-existed the period that should already have been factored in. And in fact, these are the same reasons. So it's just been sort of repeated with even more out of date assumptions. So, I'm not having a go, but for me, the process of, getting reasons from the managers about, the figures are whatever they are, and the reasons for the underspend coming from managers. Sitting here, I am expecting that there is some sort of process of iteration here where you go back and say, well, no, look, those reasons applied, that they don't seem to be relevant to what's happened in the last period. So what exactly has happened in the last period? And because if you don't have that kind of iteration and really get at the root of what the problems are, then we have no ability to interrogate these figures properly or understand what's going on and why the delays might be. So I wonder if you have any comments, if I may, through you, Chair Tom, if you have any comments about the process of sort of getting to the bottom of what's behind these underspends or overspends when they happen, and if there's anything that you might reflect on, or if you'd like to come back at a later point.
Thank you, Edna. Yes, if you can answer now, Tom, I think that'll be better.
Thank you. Yes. Well, there's our finance team works on a business partner basis. So it's an independent function reporting through to me, and they have professional challenge relationships with budget holders to scrutinise the information that's submitted, and both kind of on the quality of the narrative and on the actual accuracy of the figures. So I think some of that tension is built into the process, and it's when it works effectively, it can be very effective, that business partnering setup. There's then a number of other layers of kind of challenge and review of the papers. Councillor Murphy has drawn attention to the capital forecasting in particular, which I think is an area where we need to give further attention. Actually, for instance, I think in that example, the service director for highways and transport has just joined the capital programme board, which is the internal officer governance around this, kind of replacing a more junior officer, which I think will be very helpful. And if with the CCC focused CLT arrangements, this full report also goes to CLT for full consideration every month, which is a helpful part of the challenge process as well. We are trying to achieve two things in the report, and maybe we need to consider the presentation of that more. We do both explain the variance as it stands for the whole year, and you'll see some of the narrative is about that. And then we try and split out the change since the previous period as well. But we can take away Councillor Murphy's specific comments and maybe pick up the individual example, and working with Stephen Howitt, who's away today, kind of focus on those instances and try and improve that further.
Thank you, Tom. Richard.
Yeah, can I comment specifically on the adults and health issues on page 123, sections 2.3 and 1.4, and also on 3.4.2. And clearly this does refer back to the debates about the underspend on adult social care. Yeah, I would draw to the committee's attention that they're a little more than were forecast in January, but not substantially more. So I think a degree of correct forecasting is going in. I can certainly confirm that creative tension between the finance person and the senior managers in the area that my committee looks at exists, and I think works well. And we've got the right amount of challenge that I think works well. And although there is an underspend, I think there's, instead of talking about that being a failure of forecasting in some way, there's something really unknown going on. And I sit with the officers on a regular basis and discuss this. And COVID loss has clearly had a big impact upon our service. And it's unpredictable how quickly that's going to change. And what we've had additionally this year is these incredible pressures on the providers, and indeed in terms of recruitment and in terms of our own staff, that are limiting our capacity to deliver the services that we want to deliver. So I think, you know, it can be portrayed by the opposition that it's a failure of forecasting, but I think there's a degree that we have to say that our officers are telling us the truth and they're being honest, and that we have to be honest in discussing this in open meetings such as this. We have seen in the report this issue about the government's winter pressures money to the NHS finishing. There was an extra contract to assist with hospital discharge that the CCG new integrated care system was deliberating on, that we hoped would advance our ability to continue care for people in, at least some of the people in relation to hospital discharge. And I do want to report that contract didn't go to us, it went to CPFT. I personally discussed that with the Chief Executive at the CCG new integrated care system. And I think there was a mutual disappointment that we weren't able to do that. It would have been better if we would have been able to fulfill that contract. And she certainly said, and this was in a broader public meeting, she said there were learning points about that to get right, and I welcome that. But that's going to increase our financial difficulties, I suppose, in the next period. Two final points. One, on the decommissioning of cars. Cars is always a very misleading actually way of discussing it, but it is the way that we do. But essentially this is mobile care teams that go around, and it's actually people doing care, not cars, but they drive cars to get there. The fact that we've been able to decommission some of those is a sign of the work that we're doing to deliver more locally in a more decentralized fashion care, rather than just having centralized services and people driving around on contract. So that is a welcome improvement that I would like to draw to attention from the report. And finally, I was going to do it under the next item, not this, but as it's been mentioned by Councillor Count, it's perfectly proper that the opposition hold us to account on the public health reserve, and they have continued to do so. I don't disagree with their intent in doing that at all, but it is important to place on record that at all stages, we've committed what the Director of Public Health recommends is the minimum, leaving the minimum reserve that we need for outstanding commitments. And in particular, decisions we took in January and February this year took into account that the National Health Service pay review was pending. And I just want to assure the whole committee and the citizens of Cambridgeshire listening and watching that we did revisit this in January, February, and we committed. And we are revisiting this in our meeting in 2 or 3 weeks' time with further recommendations for commitment. So it's a fair question, but I hope that I want to put on record that we are absolutely committed to that money being spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Steve, I think it was you next.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate it's getting late on in the afternoon, a lot of tired people, but we do still need to give all these papers justice, and we can't just whiz through them because they're a bit late in the day. I'm particularly impressed by some of the intelligent questions that have been coming forward and answers that have been coming forward, even at this late time of the day. I would urge the Chair and the joint administration in total to reflect on this day is the norm and not the differential. It always overruns at S&R. It's always overly busy. And as we've had confirmed today, the next meeting isn't until the 20th of September. It somehow seems incongruous that quarterly meetings are believed to be working when we had 3 procurement papers that were either too early, too late, or improperly scoped. But as I said, I did want to say thank you for some of the contributions, particularly the one from Councillor Edna Murphy. I thought that was excellent, and move on to some of my own. So the one that first one I want to bring up is on page 126, and it's about the SEND reforms that are in discussion with the safety valve with central government. And what concerns me here is the willingness with which the County Council seems to be moving forwards to actually cutting the access for special needs children ultimately to services that are provided and are budgeted for now and have been budgeted for in the past by the Conservative regime. At the moment, we don't know exactly what will be coming there, but I'm highlighting that as a concern of mine, that this may be a cut to the most vulnerable in our society. And I know I've had discussions with Stephen Moore that the paper will come to the Children's Committee, and I urge people to go through that with a fine-tooth comb and not just look at whether you can satisfy the safety valve, but whether you can satisfy the children of Cambridgeshire that currently enjoy something that you're thinking about revising down their access to. I want to go back to the overall finance. I want to reference some of the points in here about the February budget meeting. There was a rising of the 3% policy for reserves to 4%. That was afforded by the joint administration in the budget, which took it up to about £18 million, and you've overshot that. So your budget now means you've got £20 million over that. You have a £46 million reserve. Now, at budget setting in February, our group stood up, and we said that figures were known that the underspend at that point in time were much larger than the 7.7 in the papers. And the reason we didn't formally know about it was because we had quarterly meetings. If we'd have had one for the December outturn reports, I think it was either 11 or 13. And I stood up, but you carried on and you taxed the residents of Cambridgeshire, regardless of the fact that these figures were known, and they were briefed at the at certainly the chair and vice chair level. Whether they were briefed to members of this committee or further to the members of your groups, I don't know. But even those figures, I'm staggered to find that we've overshot them. So you didn't end up with an outturn of 11, 13 million. You ended up with an outturn 26 million pounds. And I think to dismiss the fact that the Cambridgeshire residents are entitled to a refund of tax that was inappropriately taken from them, with the sort of response that I got to the First Amendment, I think they deserve better than that. There was a clear and articulated reason not to tax them in February, and we have been proved right today. It's in the bookwork. You've underspent by far more than was predicted even then. So we have another paper to go on that, and I do think that I'm going to be revisiting some of those points in the other paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any more debate I can bring in? Yes, Chris.
Really briefly, I don't want to rehash the old arguments about the public health reserve, nor the arguments I'm sure we'll have in 2 or 3 weeks' time in the relevant committee. I thought it was an admission of real failure on the part of Richard when he said that, oh, by January, the figure was, after January, the figure was reasonably stable. So by January, we knew what the overall underspend was going to be. That is no way, if that were the way that the council was run, that would be no way of running a council. However, that's not the way the council is run, because officers, finance officers and the officers within each department are more than well aware of how the effects of for example, the shortage of staff, which was mentioned quite correctly by Richard, or the COVID effects. They're quite well aware of how those are going to pan out during the course of the rest of the year. So the idea that it was only in January that it was known what the level of deficit was going to be, and that it's a good thing that we had 2 months when we actually got it right, that is, I think it's naive to say that, to be quite honest. And I would ask if officers could give some consideration as to how members could be given better information to interpret the information which is given to them about outturn positions. Because it's abundantly clear, even committee chairmen don't understand what is meant by an outturn position and what the limitations are on the information which is provided at any of our committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Would it be okay? Would you like to make any closing comments, Tom, on this? But you don't have to, absolutely not. But I do think it's, it's fine for us to note what's been said, but is there anything more that we want to say?
I'll just add very briefly on adult social care forecasting, because that is a major area of the forecast. I think there's a number of, we have a number of staff in the finance team dedicated to that, and there's a mixture of, as the year progresses, obviously there's less and less opportunity for the budget to change those sort of part year effects. But it can often take us a significant portion of the year before we have a fully accurate estimate, and often we are looking in January at the sort of November end estimates. And we have to remember those are highly volatile budgets, both across income and expenditure, across a fast-moving population. So that is a perennial challenge with older people's forecasting in particular. That's all I'd add, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Is there any more debate? If not, I would like to take the recommendations to the vote, if that's okay. A through E, we will note the outbreak, the Contain Outbreak Management Fund grant income applied centrally. We will approve the overpayment for the MRP provision with the understanding that we will get that back, right? Okay. We will approve the accounting for the internal borrowing funding swaps. We will approve the transfers to and from the earmark reserves. And we will note and comment, and we have done that on the finance monitoring report for corporate services. Everyone in favor, please. Does that look unanimous to you, Michelle? Excellent. In that case, thanks everyone, and thank you, Tom, for presenting. And now we go on to item 14. Tom again, I think.
Thank you. So this is the opening report of the new financial year, forecasting at this stage a broadly balanced position, both in revenue and capital. I'll take the committee then straight to the recommendations. So firstly, recommendation A reflects our updated estimates of the budget, noting that we set estimates at a point in time, and as we've heard in other points already in this committee, we're facing a particularly fast-moving economic and local situation in terms of demand. So we reflect there in that budget reset that we're expecting additional pressures as a result of inflation, particularly where that's built into a number of our PFI contracts or for energy costs. We've heard already in this meeting that on our adult social care budgets, we opened the year with lower levels of demand than we had anticipated following on from last year. But that phenomenon, as Councillor Howitt has said, we're continuing to watch very closely and anticipating there will be further demand this year. And as my colleague said, introducing the Treasury Management Report, we've been able to reduce our estimate for debt financing as the result of cheaper borrowing taken out in the later stages of last year at reduced interest rates. Recommendation K then is linked to resetting our reserves alongside our budgets. We did begin the year with reserves at levels higher than the target balances, and we're proposing to earmark these balances into reserves focused on business change capacity, picking up on some of the recommendations in the peer review, and as a mitigation against the unprecedented levels of risk and uncertainty we're currently facing. Recommendation B relates to further allocations from the Just Transition Funds. This is the £14 million funds that were set up by the Council in February to invest in a cleaner and greener future for the county. Over £3 million worth of that fund was allocated at full council, and there are further proposals today to add to that with investments in net zero and flooding mitigation, with the detailed cases to be considered by the Service Committee. Recommendation C notes the government's recent allocation of household support fund, and to top this up with further local funding to provide the intended levels of support locally. And then recommendations E to J deal with the capital budget, rephasing capital budgets as based on latest information, and highlighting that several schemes are under pressure from increased costs and market conditions on the capital side also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now, Steve, do you have an amendment you'd like to move?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Right, going to amendments. All right. I've two amendments. So the first one is amend the table at 5.1 on page 210. And basically, this is to remove the post-pandemic fund created by the underspend of 7.017 and refund the council tax of 2% that the Conservatives argued against in February. As said in the earlier paper and in this paper, it is clear, it's absolutely, completely clear now that the 2% council tax that was requested and imposed by the joint administration in February, that one interview after another, they said was to guarantee the delivery of services, was in fact for no such thing. Whether that was known at the time or not could be argued, but now looking through, with the benefit of hindsight, even the joint administration could find it difficult to agree that that money is used for the delivery of services, when in fact all that's happened to it is it's been put into one reserve after another after another. So now that the facts are fully exposed and known, whether you agreed with them at the time, we are giving you the opportunity to rightfully refund the money to the taxpayers that is so wrongly taken from. And the second amendment is simply the manner with which that could be arranged. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Chris, would you like to second that? Excellent. In which case, do we want to open this for debate? Does anybody have any points to make? Please. Yes, Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to refer in particular and welcome very much the environmental spend that's proposed here, the budget envelope for floods mitigation and for
Lorna, I'm very sorry.
We're talking about on the amendments.
We're on the amendment.
The amendments. No, I mean we've had this argument already about refunding money to the taxpayer. It's just unfeasible, arrant nonsense. We know very well that there is a huge financial issue facing this council, not just this coming year, but for years to come. We are working very hard to amend and address that. That will take a lot of time and energy and resource and some difficult decisions, I'm sure, but this is absolutely not the way to go, and I don't think we should be supporting it.
Thank you, Lorna. Yes, Chris.
I have to say, Chair, that when we are told things not here now, when we're told things in this very room about the justification for increases in council tax, and those justifications turn out not to be correct. And I thought that Steve was being extremely generous when he said with the benefit of hindsight, because he actually said it at the time. But when we're told that, it makes comments such as that just made by Councillor Dupré less and less believable, because unless you're consistent here about saying what it is that you're doing and admitting when you've got something wrong, unless you're consistent about that and unless you're willing to make such admissions, then what you say has less and less credibility. And you actually got it wrong last year in the budget debate and prior to the budget debate, when you said that it was going to be necessary to protect services to raise council tax. It wasn't. These numbers prove it. The admission of that would do your credibility an enormous amount of good.
Thank you very much, Chris. Is there, before I can sum up, and to an extent, you sum up what's on the paper as much as what's been discussed so far. Yes, we do have underspends, but the idea that these underspends are not going to, the divide between what we've got and what we're projected to need, it's getting bigger. So I don't want us to give the impression that we are able going forward to refund the taxpayer for every single underspend that we encounter, because the implications of that would be astounding. And, not all, without going into the details as to how much, because if we were minded to do that, which we can be minded to say, every time we report an underspend, we're going to refund it. How much would that cost? Because it's not a system that we've got in place. And therefore, it's not feasible to propose it at this point in time. If the implications of what you're saying are correct, we would find ourselves not with a budget deficit in February 2023. Now, the information we've got at this point is that we very much will find ourselves with an ever-increasing budget deficit. I am reminded, and this is probably the appropriate point to make it at this point. I am reminded of the motion I brought to full council in 2018. That was my first motion, December 2018, where it was proved, where we worked on the numbers and we proved that between 2013 and 2018 at that point, the level of funding that this council was receiving, we'd lost 60p to the pound at that point, and that curve is progressing. So the idea that these underspends prove that we don't need council taxes, it doesn't even begin, and I suspect you know that. Therefore, unless there's any more discussion on this amendment, I would just like to take it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against?
Chair, the result of the vote is 6 votes in favour, 7 against. The amendment is therefore lost.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now, we've got recommendations A to L, is that correct, as an amended? Would you like to start the discussion on those? Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some points on those. I'd just like to comment on some of the things that are said. Never asked for refunding underspends because there are underspends. Never, ever said that. I said I wanted underspends refunded because they were incorrectly taken and we've been proved to be correct. Very different thing indeed. But let's go on to the main paper. Page 194, commentary. Growing number of people who have survived COVID being left with significant needs, and many vulnerable adults have developed more complex needs as they have not accessed the usual community-based or early help services due to lockdown. Page 156, many vulnerable adults developed more complex needs during lockdown as they did not access the usual community-based, etc. We are expecting the longer term financial impact of this to be significant. We are also experiencing a high volume of referrals from hospitals, and the level of need and complexity of patients needing care or reablement support is increasing. Joint administration response. stripping 3.525 million out of the adult social care budget. So I really think that tying up your commentaries between how desperate things are and your ability to strip monies away should be references. At the same time, you're putting £4 million into business change, organisational change, which, as said earlier, the vast majority of that is to increase the pay offerings or the pay structures, or all at the senior management level. I'd also comment that you spent in the business plan, I think it's about £26 million on your real living wage proposals summed up over the 5 years. So when you talk about the widening gap, please don't look to the historic events that were there or those embedded in. Please look at the decisions you're making that are actually widening it all the way through yourselves. Because actually a lot of the actions that you're taking have repercussions financially, with very little that we're seeing to deal with the actual deficit, which is something that needs a lot more activity on it. The paper on 1.7 million pounds for the flood mitigation. I've got a question for officers on that one, please. And that is, as far as I could make out, I wanted to know, is any of that 1.7 million pounds going to actually deliver any flood defences? And I do have a parochial interest because I live in March. As we all know, if anybody's listened to me in the past, it's not really parochial. It is actually true that March has a massive issue due to surface water runoff, much more so than any other town or village, whereas other towns or villages have flooding issues due to other reasons, such as fluvial flooding. So what I want to know is this 1.7 million pounds, will it actually deliver any actual flood defence? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Can we answer those before we proceed with the debate? Does anybody know?
Yeah, a few points in reply to that, Chair. So I think Councillor Count very helpfully referred to the kind of complexity of the adults budget, which we've talked about already, and taking the committee to page 193 in the graph, you'll see there. I think it's important to signal that the adjustment, the budget reduction in this case, is the difference between the dotted line and the dashed line, and you can see where current demand is in red in relation to that. So clearly current demand is below the budgeted level, but you'll see the dashed line continue at quite a steep trajectory during the rest of the year, so building in that scope for further growth. But also that the red shaded area kind of expands as the year continues as well, and that reflects the uncertainty and range that we are likely to see there. On flood defence, so EGI committee will consider that proposal in more detail, but the allocation absolutely is about enabling flood mitigation and flood defence. Some of the work is about design that then may lead on to further capital requests, but I think this is the right way around to be doing that approach, and some of it is focused on March, I believe, as well. There may have been a further point Councillor Count wanted me to address the...
Apologies, Chair, through you. Not for you, Tom. They were more general about commentary about the widening of the gap and how decisions of the joint administration affect that both one way with commitments they've made, as opposed to lack of commitments on actually finding ways to balance it. So it wasn't really for commentary for you. Can I ask on the flood defence though? So I've read it correctly then. We're going to spend £1.7 million, which I'm really grateful for, because a lot of this may help the people of March. But wouldn't it make more sense to actually fund schemes that are live, willing and able? I know of one on Sycamore Close that I've been told has got the capital funding for, but there are others that are sort of ready there sitting. Wouldn't it make sense, whether it's in March or anywhere, to say before we spend, or as we spend £1.7 million more revenue on working up new schemes, that we actually finance some of the ones that are sitting there waiting to be delivered, or that have bids from other districts, Anglian Water, Environmental Society, to their funds, their pots to actually deliver some. You know that in the budget last year, we put forward a proposal for a £4 million capital pot because two of the other parties, Anglian Water Environment Agency, also have matched capital pots, and we could actually get some schemes off the ground. So I don't want to rehash whether it was Conservative or not. It would be a good idea. It would be a good idea to have a capital pot to start delivering some flood defences instead of just working up schemes where they're not funded at the end of it. So just highlighting that this is revenue spent to think about more projects, and I'd like to see some more stuff delivered on the ground, please. Thank you. Thank
you, Steve. And there's definitely a place for those proposals to be considered, and it's coming up. Tom, did you want to say anything else before is that all fine? Lorna, that's up, and then Richard.
Yep. This is the point at which I can say how much I welcome the two proposals for investment from the council resources for environmental projects under Just Transition Fund, enabling net zero, and the case for that has been described there in terms of the work that's necessary to upskill the organisation and plan across the organisation to deliver our environmental ambitions. And on the floods, the meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee is on the 7th of next month, which means that the papers for that meeting will be published imminently, and Councillor Count need wait only a few days, or indeed talk to his colleagues to find out what's actually being proposed there. But definitely, I think, good news in the right direction.
Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, just consistent with the points I made earlier in relation to the adult social care budgets, particularly the elements in the report on page 194. I think it is important to place on record my concern about the rebaselining. I support the recommendations because I think it's really important that adults and health contribute to the corporate whole, and I support the processes that are in place for us to do it. But I also think it would be remiss not to also draw to attention that there is uncertainty about what's going to happen. And I don't see that as a failure of forecasting or officers not knowing what's happening at all, as I said earlier. But I'm extremely worried that the apparent not increase in demand, particularly for elderly persons care, reflects not simply lack of demand coming through, but might reflect our failure to be able to adequately meet need, and that it should be coming through, and that there are problems within the process that we need to check. And I'm delighted that the adults and health officers are doing a study around need at the moment, just to make sure that that's an element that we're not getting wrong. And I want to be open in saying that. I think there are issues, critical issues around recruitment of staff, both within the authority and amongst our providers, that are likely to see more resource calls during the course of the year. Yeah, one hopes that the government's contribution might be there, but all the indications at the moment are that the money that we all hope for from the adult social care reforms won't meet the extra costs. And I just note from the report the points about the cost of care that is likely to change in the course of the autumn, and which can provide a greater call on our resources. And so really I just want to put on myself, to be honest, and to put on notice, yes, it's right that we've done the rebaselining, but it's also right that we recognise that the situation may change and is very likely to change again during the course of the rest of the year. And so I don't want us to be in 3 months and 6 months time here saying, well, why didn't you know that at the time? I want to say it now so people are aware of those extra pressures that are there. And I don't see them as inconsistencies in the report between the commentary and so on. I see them as a genuine attempt to reflect the uncertain situation that we're in.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to address paragraph 2.1 to start off with, which is the table for the revenue budget for the current year and the forecast variance for 22-23. And it's almost as the great philosopher Yogi Berra once said, it's almost like deja vu all over again, when I think that 7 years ago, almost to the month, but not in this building, but in our old building, I remember sitting in a committee meeting of the Adults Committee, as it was, with Tom, who was our finance officer then in that committee, pointing out that some of the data which was presented to us at that time, there was a journals or equivalent of a journals column, was absolutely and completely meaningless to members and contributed nothing whatsoever to our understanding of the financial position of the council. Unfortunately, that column was duly removed. And I say that looking at these numbers and thinking, just what value do some of these numbers and some of this information have to members? Let me give you one example. And that is the actuals figures which are shown here. Now we're showing 2 months. The first 1 month is absolutely hopeless. I fully understand from a practical point of view that the earlier in the year you report, the more you'll have variances which are very difficult to take into account when you're trying to project forwards. But when you have produced numbers which show that we have let's take one example, a capital financing budget, expected cost in the year of 33 million, and our actual for the first 2 months of the year is minus 2.7 million. What are any members, I'm not just talking about members of the S&R, some of whom are very well informed, I'm sure, what are our members generally meant to make of that? And this sort of reporting is what we have, which goes through all of our committees. Now, I fully understand where it comes from and why it exists. I'm not saying it's wrong at all. In terms of what it actually reports, in terms of the processing of invoices and the processing of transactions, it is actually correct as of that date. So I'm not saying it's a wrong figure whatsoever, but for anyone who doesn't understand the way that process actually works, it is an absolutely meaningless piece of information. What is meaningful, potentially, in the report that we're given, is the forecast variance. We can all understand what a forecast variance is, or we should be able to. And one imagines a forecast variance is what we think the result will be at the end of the year. Now, we've already had in our previous agenda item an agreement from Tom that these forecast variance figures, which are produced for our benefit, for the benefit of members, for the benefit of the S&R committee, that these need interpretation. So if we look at the diagram we've got on the next page for the forecast outturn position 22-23, we see, well, in fact, all the numbers are jumbled together, but we've got an overall forecast outturn position of plus 140,000. What I'd like to ask, and I think in the terms of what we had in our last agenda item, which is completely legitimate and it should be welcomed by everyone, is that officers, particularly Tom, I have to say, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Tom, but officers have a much better idea of what is in the pipeline in terms of, for example, increased costs, which hadn't been allowed for before, or the likelihood of demand being less in certain cases than we had before, or, to answer the point that was made by Richard just a few minutes ago, the likelihood that we'll have capacity insufficient to meet the budget requirements that we originally have. Officers will have a much better idea of this than we will have. So my question, which I think is a legitimate one, but I know is extremely difficult to Tom, and if he swerves it, I don't blame him, is thank you for giving us this information. Could you interpret it for us, please? What does it actually mean in terms of what you expect the outturn to be at the end of the year, and what shape will this graph be during the course of the year? And I know how unfair to some extent that request is, and as I say, if Tom swerves that question, I don't blame him. But Tom, you're in a stronger position than any of the rest of us to be able to interpret the information you're giving us.
Thank you, Chris. Tom, you're welcome to swerve.
Well, thank you very much. I think the first thing I should probably say is that we've done a more substantial reformat on this report than we have for some time. And had my colleague have been here, he would have made that point. That's directly into feedback we've heard from this committee, but we're always happy to take more feedback, and I'll particularly look at that actuals column and the points you make at this point in the year. Of course, we are always looking at information that's coming down the pipeline and making judgments as officers about what to escalate, what to take into the committee. At this point in time, our best forecast is the one that we've put forward in May, which is broadly balanced. I think we know we have the uncertainties we've already talked about, particularly in adult social care demand and and staffing levels. I suppose those are the things that may underspend more than expected, and at the same time facing significant cost inflation, particularly on energy and construction, more in the capital programme, but the knock-on impact there. Yeah, so I mean, hopefully that's helpful at this stage.
Thank you, Tom. Is there any more debate, any more questions, anything at all? At which point, going once, going twice, I would like to put the recommendations to a vote, if I may. I will do, if you will forgive me, I don't think I can survive reading them all out. There's 12 of them, A through to L. I do, however, want to make one point which summarizes some of the debate we had about recommendation K, which is we have got an underspend at year end, which was higher than budgeted, and that ended up in the general fund, right? So what Tom is proposing at table 5.1, because we have a policy on how high those reserves can be, that is taken out of the reserves and is put into two places where it is absolutely needed. The first of those two places is the high needs block. The second of those places is a post-pandemic budgeting account, which we need to cope with the uncertainty, which is not something that is our fault. With regards to inflation, demands for services and government reforms, including reforms regarding adult social care and interest rates. All of those things are changing and we do need to deal with them. So that makes the point that that money is not needed and refundable to the taxpayer because it sits there unneeded. It is needed. So that is the summary that I would like to put forward as to these recommendations. As I said, they go from A to L. I will take them on block. Everyone in favor, please. I will take that as unanimous unless I am shouted down. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. We have done 15 and 16, which, dare I say it, does that mean we're done? Yes. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Apologies, personal apologies for just how long this has taken, but I do think that debate, some of that lengthy debate was necessary. So thank you very much. And thanks to anyone who's still on the line at this point.